That's the bell ringing on Wall Street, and that means the US markets are open. We're live across the globe, and it's time for the money news that matters. I'm Susannah Streeter, and this is Talking Business. Let's take a look at the headlines. Our top story, from tax to cryptocurrency, tech titans are under attack on both sides of the Atlantic. Finance chiefs from the world's biggest economies meet in France over the thorny issue of taxing the tech giants, while in Washington, Facebook fends off an attack of its plan to dominate digital payments. We're going to be hearing from one expert who says after years of bad press, big tech should embrace a fairer tax system if it's to rebuild trust. Also, a big week for earnings. Bank of America scores record profits in the second quarter. We get all the latest from the New York Stock Exchange. And as usual, we've got all the very latest from the global markets around the world. Bit of a sea of red just on the board there. And Culture Club. What's the secrets of your workplaces? Are they happy, engaged and profitable places? Doing it wrong costs the US up to $550 billion a year. We'll find out what marks out good companies from truly great ones. And that's all to come on this edition of Talking Business. Good morning, America. Good evening, Asia. Hello, world. The world's biggest tech titans, dominance of the modern economy. That's the problem taking centre stage today. Finance ministers from the world's top economies, the G7 group, are meeting in France today to debate the thorny question of just how to tax tech giants. Well, last week, President Macron's government became the first in the world to pass a tax on sales of big tech firms. So the likes of Google, Amazon, Facebook and Apple will have to pay 3% on sales in France if they have global sales of around $840 million. Well, Britain is also planning a 2% tax on sales of search engines, social media firms and on online marketplaces serving UK customers from April. But both countries have said they'll ditch those taxes if an international agreement can be reached. America, though, is fuming. Its trade chief, Robert Lighthizer, said that the French levy unfairly targets American companies, and he's launched a legal investigation. Across the Atlantic, Facebook will be grilled again about its plan to dominate digital currencies with its virtual coin Libra, backed by 28 firms, including Visa, MasterCard, Uber, Lyft and Spotify. Facebook wants to make payments as easy as texting for its 2 billion users and tap some 1.7 billion adults across the globe without bank accounts, attracting more advertising dollars on the way. Well, let's get rid of the prism now and find out more about all of these developments, which are really concentrating minds on both sides of the Atlantic. We'll be speaking to our tech expert, Tommy Sadler, in just a moment. But first of all, let's go over to our North America technology correspondent, Dave Lee, who is in Washington. Dave, what are we expecting today? Another grilling for Facebook?
Yes, I think it will be a grilling, Susannah, and perhaps even more tense for Facebook than it was yesterday. David Marcus is the Facebook representative that's going to be appearing. He's the head of their cryptocurrency efforts. Yesterday, he went to a lot of effort to say that Facebook wouldn't launch this until regulators were fully satisfied. But I think a big question today in this next hearing will be whether regulators will ever be satisfied, because one of the discussion points is going to be a new bill that's being tabled, being discussed, called the Keep Big Tech Out of Finance Act. That's something that's going to potentially seek to stop big tech companies like Facebook and others being ever allowed to enter the banking industry. So, of course, if that was to pass down the line in about a year or so's time, Facebook wouldn't be allowed to do this at all. And so I think that's going to be one of the things the company is definitely seeking to avoid. They're here, Facebook's here, to try and reassure congressmen and women that despite 18 months or so of scandal and privacy failures being uncovered, they can handle what could be a potentially hugely disruptive project, and they can do that in a way that doesn't put their users at risk in the way they have done in the past.
As you alluded to there, it's not just about Facebook, it's the other big tech giants as well. And there is real concern, because this is an antitrust hearing, isn't it, about their dominance in other sectors as well, not just cryptocurrencies, that's the focus today, but all industries.
Yes, well, the antitrust hearings, there was a big one yesterday, the first step, I guess you could say, in the US starting to formulate something of a different regulatory system for them. And each of the companies that was there, it was Amazon, Google, Apple and Facebook, they were each told, where is your competition? How do we know you're not abusing your position? And I have to say the companies did defend themselves pretty strongly. You had firms like Amazon, for example, saying that they're an open marketplace. They said that more than 60% of things sold on Amazon are sold by third parties. But then, of course, in response to that, the House committee was saying, well, how do we know you're not manipulating your position as that marketplace to further your own interests, to sell your own products ahead of those competitors on your store? So this has got a way to run, but I think finally, and these hearings have been criticised in the past for not really going anywhere, just being sound bites for television, I think finally we're starting to see the starting point of what might be regulation here in the future. OK,
thank you very much, Dave Lee in Washington. Well, with me now is Tommy Sadden, who's from First Minute Capital. Tommy, we heard there what Dave Lee had to say, but in France there's a real push to tax the tech giants led by France. It says the time for talking is over. Dave was alluding to that as well in Washington. We're starting to see some action, but is going it alone the right course of action that France is taking?
I entirely understand why France has done what they've done. They've waited for a long time for the rest of the European Union and indeed the rest of the OECD to come together and have a fair rate of tax across those countries. People are dragging their feet, essentially because they're scared of repercussions from the US. And so France has said enough is enough. These companies have to pay their fair share of tax in France, and the UK looks like it will follow suit. Fundamentally, this is an absolutely fair thing to do. You've got these big tech companies, they're earning billions of dollars in European markets, and they should pay their fair share of tax. I say that as a tech entrepreneur and investor myself. I think all enlightened tech CEOs would say the same thing.
The thing is, though, there isn't really yet a global consensus. That's what France is trying to get, the G7 meeting of finance ministers today. But others are saying, look, we should really wait for a global consensus from the OECD. And plans are afoot. There's lots of talking going on. Are we expecting some kind of agreement shortly?
I think you might get pockets of countries agreeing to come together on this. But I think the US on the one hand, because obviously these tech companies are US predominantly, they won't like it. And I think you get countries like Ireland in the EU who rely on attracting big tech companies by having very low rates of tax. They won't come along easily too. So I think very unlikely, unfortunately, to get the cooperation that countries need and that tech companies need to make this tax really efficient.
When you say what tech companies need, do you think that they really need a tax like this, do you? Because, of course, it would be interesting to see that if there is some kind of pockets of agreement, just how much opposition will come from the tech giants.
Well, I think tax, 2% or 3% of revenues is a cheap price for big tech to pay to regain public trust. They've been hammered on everything from sexism to the ethics of AI to the invasion of privacy, even Libra, the cryptocurrency that Facebook's launching, which you mentioned. There are so many issues where they're under fire. They need to do such a better job at defining their contribution to society. And the most basic part of that is paying your fair share of tax. So I think they should embrace it.
OK, thank you very much. So, Tommy Sadden from First Minute Capital and also Dave Lee in Washington explaining really what the issues at stake are for the tech giants. Let's move on to some other news now. And Renault has formed a joint venture with China's Jiangling Motors to build electric cars for the Chinese market. It's one of the fastest growing in the world, with more than 1 million vehicles sold last year. Renault will take a 50% stake in the venture. The EU's top competition regulator is launching an investigation into Amazon. There are suspicions the online giant misused merchant data on its website. Amazon could face a fine of up to 10% of global sales. It said it would cooperate with the authorities. And Christine Lagarde has announced she will be stepping down as Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. It comes after she was nominated to be the next leader of the European Central Bank. She'll leave her role at the IMF in September. G7 finance ministers are likely to discuss her replacement at that meeting today, which we've already been talking about. It is time now to look at how the markets are doing. Now, resurgent trade tensions, some concern about the outlook for corporate America and the growing risk of a chaotic Brexit has slightly dampened appetite for equities while keeping alive interest in the dollar and government bonds. This is how the FTSE 100 in London is looking at the moment. It's been in negative territory for the session. In Frankfurt, the DAX briefly turned positive earlier, but also is lower. In Tokyo, the Nikkei also ended on the back foot, and oil prices have not recovered much from falls yesterday, weighed down by industry data suggesting US crude inventories fell less than expected. So that's where Brent crude is trading at the moment. We'll be looking at how the US markets are doing a little bit later, because often, as we've heard, there's actually quite a lot of information coming out about US corporate earnings. We'll see if we can get an update on that. So it has been a very busy week for the earnings calendar. But before we go to that, we've got some breaking news from Boeing. And let's have a chat to Michelle Flo, who's at the New York Stock Exchange. I'm sure, Michelle, you've been covering the Boeing story a lot. Tell me what the latest news is.
So we've known for a while that Boeing had set aside about $100 million to try and address some of the needs of families involved in the crashes in Ethiopia and Indonesia. Now they have said that $50 million of that will go straight to the families. The fund that is being set up will be administered by Camille Biros and Kenneth Feinberg. And Susannah, if that name sounds familiar, it's because it certainly is. Kenneth Feinberg was involved in administering the compensation fund for 9/11 victims and also General Motors when they had a problem with ignition switches. The victims' compensation fund was administered by him. So he certainly is a familiar name. Dennis Muilenburg, who is the CEO of Boeing, put out this statement saying the tragic loss of life in both accidents continues to weigh heavily on all of us at Boeing. He goes on to say, through our partnership with Feinberg and Biros, we hope affected families receive needed assistance as quickly and efficiently as possible.
OK, Michelle Fleury, thank you very much for that update on the Boeing 737 MAX, which, of course, was involved in 2 fatal crashes. Some developing news there that Michelle was telling us about. It's time now to take a quick look at what's trending online in the business world. Fancy a brain chip to help you talk to computers? Well, that may be coming a step closer thanks to Tesla boss Elon Musk. The New York Times reports his mysterious Neuralink project plans to insert its first brain chip as early as next year. Now, world leaders are always telling us to go green, but they aren't setting a good example, according to the travel portal From A to B. It claims many are leaving a huge carbon footprint with their global travel, and the worst offender, Japanese leader, Shinzo Abe. And Saudi Arabia is going 24/7. Bloomberg reports its shops can pay a fee to operate 24 hours a day. But apparently some people are confused because there are rules that also require businesses to shut 5 times a day for prayer. So those are just some of the stories that are trending online in the business world. There is lots more coming up here on Talking Business as well, including corporate culture. Is that a buzzword or a serious issue that can cost your firm billions? We'll get some top tips from the man who's helped Google, General Motors and Southwest Airlines create a happy and profitable workforce, he claims.
At Business Live, news isn't just for business people.
Whether it's in Europe, Asia or the US, when a story breaks, we break it down.
We'll help you understand what it means for you, and we want your